On April 5, 2003, in the warm, glamorous air of Palm Beach, Florida, an event unfolded that would bring together Hollywood stars, industry moguls, and curious onlookers in an evening drenched in champagne, flash photography, and whispers of power. It was the 8th annual Palm Beach International Film Festival, a gathering that was never short on luxury, but this particular night carried something far more magnetic. Because somewhere among the glittering gowns, tuxedos, and polished silverware, Michael Jackson appeared. The king of pop. The man the world thought it knew, but could never quite understand. His presence at this festival would be brief, quiet, almost enigmatic, yet it would leave a trail of questions that have never fully been answered. Why was he there? Who was he with? And what was hidden behind his delicate smile as he sat silently at that table, surrounded by Hollywood insiders? Tonight, we revisit that evening not as gossip, not as mere celebrity coverage, but as an untold chapter in the mystery of Michael Jackson's life. The festival itself had always been an odd mix of prestige and locality, a celebration of independent filmmaking backed by the money and glamour of Palm Beach's elite. There were directors hoping for distribution, actors seeking recognition, and producers rubbing shoulders with investors who could make their dreams a reality. For the crowd that year, the arrival of stars like Chris Tucker and Brett Ratner already gave the event weight. But no one expected Michael Jackson to appear. When whispers ran through the room that he was coming, some dismissed it as rumor. After all, why would Michael, the most famous entertainer alive, spend an evening at a film festival in Palm Beach? Yet, just as the night deepened, there he was. Dressed immaculately, his signature dark hair framing his porcelain face, a red shirt glowing against his black suit, Michael Jackson slipped into the room like a living apparition. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. People gasped, others whispered, and some simply stared, unable to process that they were in the same space as the man who had once moonwalked across the stages of the world. Michael sat at a table, his posture elegant yet reserved, beside his close friend Chris Tucker, who seemed both protective and amused by the attention swirling around them. Tucker, known for his booming laugh and comedic energy, seemed to anchor Michael in that moment, giving him a sense of safety amid the noise of the evening. Cameras flashed endlessly, capturing Michael's faint smile, his quiet presence, his almost fragile aura. Unlike other celebrities at the event who mingled, laughed loudly, and soaked in the attention, Michael remained calm, almost withdrawn, as if he was there physically but his spirit was elsewhere. And this is where the mystery begins. Because when Michael Jackson appeared in public, especially in places where he wasn't expected, there was always more than met the the Palm Beach Film Festival. Michael wasn't promoting an album. He wasn't performing. He wasn't even receiving an award. So why was he there? Some would later suggest it was simply friendship, that he came to support Chris Tucker and Brett Ratner, who were closely tied to the Hollywood crowd in attendance. Others whispered that Michael was quietly exploring the world of film financing, perhaps considering a new chapter of his career. He had always dreamed of directing films, of telling stories beyond music. Could it be that this night was part of that hidden pursuit? Or was it something else entirely? The images from that evening tell their own story. In one photograph, Michael sits beside Chris Tucker, his hands folded, his expression serene yet unreadable. Around them, bottles of champagne and fine wine decorate the table, though Michael himself was never one to indulge. His eyes seem both curious and cautious, as if he is watching the room more than he is part of it. In another picture, the group expands, with Brett Ratner, Steve Wynn, and other notable figures leaning in, smiling widely for the cameras. And there, at the center of it all, sits Michael Jackson, still, almost ghost-like, the quiet nucleus of the storm of celebrity energy around him. To the casual observer, it might seem like nothing more than a star attending a glamorous event. But with Michael Jackson, nothing was ever that simple. This was 2003, a turbulent time in his life. Public scrutiny was intensifying. Rumors and accusations swirled endlessly. He was fighting battles both in the courts and in the media. And yet, here he was, stepping into a space filled with Hollywood elite, his presence commanding attention, his image burning into the memories of everyone who saw him. Was this a deliberate move, a way to remind the world of his continued relevance and power? Or was it a moment of escape, a night where Michael simply wanted to be part of something outside the chaos of his world? As the night unfolded, Michael rarely spoke publicly. There were no grand speeches, no performances, no dramatic entrances or exits. Instead, he remained understated, his aura doing all the speaking. And that in itself became the drama. Because when you are Michael Jackson, your silence is louder than anyone else's words. The cameras kept clicking, the flashes bouncing off his pale face and dark hair, and with every shot, the legend of the evening grew. People would later say they couldn't remember what films were showcased that night, or which awards were given. They only remembered that Michael Jackson had been there, but beneath the surface of the glamour, there are details that carry weight. Michael's choice to sit beside Chris Tucker was no coincidence. The two shared a bond, one that extended beyond celebrity friendship. Tucker, who had starred in the Rush Hour films, had also appeared in Michael's You Rock My World short film. They laughed together, prayed together, and supported each other in ways that went unseen by the public. In those turbulent years, Tucker was one of the few people Michael trusted deeply. And so, while the rest of the room may have seen a superstar in the spotlight, what Michael perhaps felt was a moment of protection, a pocket of friendship in a world that so often betrayed him. The festival itself was filled with the typical chaos of Hollywood networking, deals whispered over cocktails, scripts pitched between sips of wine, producers and investors shaking hands with exaggerated smiles. Yet, amid that noise, the presence of Michael Jackson shifted the atmosphere. Conversations paused. Heads turned. Even the most powerful people in the room could not resist the gravitational pull of his aura. Michael was used to it, of course. He had lived with this magnetism since childhood. But that night, in Palm Beach, there was something different. He seemed less like the performer commanding a stage and more like a man quietly observing, almost studying the people around him, and here lies one of the most compelling mysteries of that night. Because some believe Michael's appearance at Palm Beach was part of a larger, hidden agenda. They argue that he wasn't there just for friendship or leisure. Instead, he may have been exploring connections in the film industry, testing waters for creative projects that never came to light. Michael had always been fascinated with cinema. From his collaboration with John Landis on Thriller, to his ambitious Ghosts short film, he constantly pushed the boundaries of storytelling. Could it be that this evening in Palm Beach was a subtle step toward a future project? Something the world never got to see? The answer may never be known, but the speculation only adds to the allure of that night. Because with Michael Jackson, every public appearance felt like a puzzle, a piece of a much larger picture that no one could fully assemble. The images from Palm Beach would resurface years later, long after Michael's passing, as fans combed through archives, looking for meaning in every detail of his life. The red shirt, the black blazer, the jewel at his collar, fans debated their symbolism, their significance. Was the red a statement of boldness, of resilience? Was his calm smile a mask hiding the turmoil of 2003? Every detail became part of the mythology. And perhaps that is the essence of Michael Jackson. He was never just a man in a room. He was always a symbol, always a story waiting to be told. And so, that night at the Palm Beach International Film Festival became more than just a social appearance. It became another chapter in the enigmatic saga of the King of Pop. A night where he sat silently among the powerful, watched the room with careful eyes, and reminded the world that even in stillness, he was unforgettable. What we know for certain is this: on April 5, 2003, the Palm Beach Film Festival was no longer about films. It was about Michael Jackson. His presence overshadowed everything else. And as he left that night, slipping back into the shadows from which he had come, he left behind not just photographs, but questions that still linger today. Why was he there? What did he see? And what did it mean? The truth, as always with Michael Jackson, may never be fully revealed. But perhaps that is the magic. Because Michael was never just a man. He was a mystery, a legend, a story that continues to unfold long after the night has ended. And maybe, just maybe, that is how he wanted it. If you believe Michael Jackson's legacy deserves to live forever, don't just watch this story, share it. Let the world remember not just the king of pop on stage, but the enigmatic man who could transform a quiet evening in Palm Beach into a timeless mystery. Because in the end, Michael Jackson was not only the music we danced to. He was the story we could never stop telling. Michael Jackson in 2003 was a man at a crossroads, walking a tightrope between his towering legacy and the storms of controversy that shadowed him. Just a few years earlier, he had released Invincible, his final studio album, a project that, despite selling millions, had left Michael disillusioned with the music industry. The album had been his labor of love, a defiant statement that he was still capable of pushing boundaries. But behind the scenes, he was fighting with record executives, battling for creative freedom, and struggling with a system that he believed no longer respected artists. His feud with Sony Music was not just professional, it was personal, and it had cut him deeply. By the time April of 2003 arrived, Michael had grown weary of the machinery of the music industry. Even as fans continued to adore him, that weariness made appearances like the Palm Beach Film Festival all the more intriguing. Why would a man who was pulling away from the spotlight step back into it, not on a stage, but in a banquet hall filled with filmmakers, investors, and celebrities? To answer that, we must look closer at the friendships that carried Michael during those turbulent years. Chris Tucker had become one of Michael's most trusted companions. Unlike many who surrounded him, Chris was not interested in using Michael for fame or fortune. Their bond was rooted in laughter, in faith, and in loyalty. Tucker often described Michael as playful, funny, and deeply spiritual, qualities the public rarely saw behind the headlines. When Michael felt the crushing weight of the world's judgment, Chris was one of the few who could make him laugh, one of the few who could remind him that joy was still possible. It was no coincidence that Chris sat beside him in Palm Beach. For Michael, Tucker was more than a friend, he was a shield, a source of comfort in a world that so often felt unsafe. And then there was Brett Ratner, the Hollywood director known for his flamboyant personality and connections. Ratner and Tucker had worked together on the Rush Hour films, and Ratner too had grown close to Michael. Ratner admired Michael not just as an entertainer, but as a man who had transcended fame itself. To Ratner, Michael wasn't just a superstar, he was a cultural force, someone who could walk into any room and instantly change its energy. Ratner once described Michael as having a childlike curiosity mixed with an almost regal presence, a contradiction that fascinated everyone who knew him. Ratner's presence at Palm Beach, alongside Tucker and Michael, created a triangle of friendship and influence that spoke volumes, but Michael's world was never simple. By April 2003, he was also facing the gathering storm of accusations and legal battles that would soon engulf him. The infamous Martin Bashir documentary, Living with Michael Jackson, had aired just months earlier in February, painting a controversial and often distorted picture of his life. That program had unleashed a firestorm of media scrutiny, reigniting old rumors and casting shadows over his character. For Michael, it was a devastating betrayal, one that left him vulnerable, angry, and misunderstood. And yet, despite all of this, he chose to walk into the Palm Beach Film Festival, dressed immaculately, smiling softly, as though he carried none of the pain the world had forced upon him. That in itself was a statement. Imagine the scene, the grand ballroom glittering with chandeliers, the tables adorned with crystal glasses and fine china, the air thick with perfume and anticipation. Hollywood insiders buzzed with conversations about projects, deals, and stars. And then, like a ripple cutting through still water, the word spread, Michael Jackson is here. Heads turned, cameras rushed, and conversations stopped mid-sentence. For a man so often hounded by the press, Michael still carried a presence that could silence an entire room. He wasn't on stage. He wasn't singing. He wasn't dancing. He was simply sitting. Yet, in that stillness, he was the brightest star in the galaxy of Palm Beach. What makes this night so fascinating is not just Michael's presence, but his demeanor. Look closely at the photographs. Michael's face, pale and framed by his signature dark hair, carries a subtle calmness. His red shirt bursts with color, a defiant contrast against the muted tones of the suits and gowns around him. His eyes, wide and thoughtful, do not seem to chase attention but rather observe. He is present, yet apart. He is surrounded, yet isolated. It is the paradox of Michael Jackson made visible in a single frame. For those who knew him personally, this was no surprise. Michael was often described as both shy and commanding. On stage, he was a god. Off stage, he was often quiet, contemplative, even nervous in social situations. At Palm Beach, that duality was on full display. Chris Tucker leaned into him, smiling warmly, while others around the table laughed and posed for photos. And yet, Michael's smile was different. Softer. Measured. As though he was aware that every click of the camera was not just a snapshot, but a piece of history that would be dissected for years to come, and dissected it was. Fans who studied the photos later pointed out the details. The way Michael's hands rested gently on the table, fingers lightly curled, as though poised but not tense. The jewel at his collar, sparkling like a secret symbol. Even the positioning of the wine bottles in front of him became a point of fascination. Michael, who rarely drank, sitting at a table adorned with champagne and fine liquor. Was it irony? Was it symbolism? Or was it simply circumstance? With Michael, the line between coincidence and intention was always blurred. Beyond the fascination of fans, however, lies a deeper question: what did Michael himself seek that night? Was it friendship? Was it business? Was it escape? Perhaps it was all three. Michael had long dreamed of expanding into film, of telling stories through the medium he adored as much as music. He had spoken often of his love for Charlie Chaplin, for the silent era of cinema, for the power of visual storytelling. In Palm Beach, surrounded by filmmakers and investors, could Michael have been quietly laying the groundwork for dreams the world never saw? The thought lingers, tantalizing, because with Michael Jackson, nothing was ever without purpose. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of that night is the timing. Within months, Michael's life would spiral further into chaos. The accusations, the investigations, the trials, all of it would consume him in the years that followed. Looking back at Palm Beach, the images take on a bittersweet quality. Here was Michael, dressed elegantly, smiling gently, sharing a table with friends, seemingly at peace for a moment in time. It was a calm before the storm, a fleeting glimpse of the man behind the myth before the world once again turned its eyes on him with suspicion and cruelty. To watch those images today is to feel a pang of both admiration and sorrow. Admiration for the grace with which Michael carried himself, even in the face of endless scrutiny. Sorrow for the pain we now know he was enduring, the battles he was fighting silently as cameras captured only the surface. The Palm Beach Film Festival may have been just one night, but in Michael's story, it symbolizes something much larger. It is a reminder that behind the legend was a man who longed for normalcy, for connection, for a seat at the table where he could simply exist without judgment. And yet, even in those moments, the world demanded more. It demanded meaning, symbolism, explanation. Because Michael Jackson could never simply be. He was always more than himself. He was an icon, a target, a savior, a sinner, a mystery. That is the tragedy and the triumph of his life. At Palm Beach, he sat among friends, but he also sat among history. Every movement, every smile, every glance became a part of the myth of Michael Jackson. As the night ended, Michael slipped away as quietly as he had arrived. No grand farewell, no dramatic exit. Just as always, he vanished into the shadows, leaving behind whispers, photographs, and questions. The ballroom returned to its normal rhythm, the conversations resumed, the laughter continued. But for those who had been there, nothing could erase the memory. They had shared a room with the king of pop. They had seen him, not on stage, but at a table, in a moment of fragile humanity, and that is perhaps the most powerful revelation of Palm Beach 2003. That Michael Jackson, the man the world saw as larger than life, was still human. He laughed with friends. He sat at dinners. He observed the world quietly. He was not always performing. Sometimes, he was simply being. And maybe, just maybe, that is the version of Michael the world most often overlooked. Today, 2 decades later, those images still circulate online. Fans study them, historians discuss them, and documentaries reference them. They are a fragment of a life too complex to fully understand, but they remind us of something essential. Michael Jackson was not just the king of pop. He was a man navigating a world that both adored and destroyed him. And at Palm Beach, for one night, he was both at once. That if you believe Michael Jackson's story deserves to live forever, if you believe his truth is greater than the lies that haunted him, then share this story. Because Michael Jackson's legacy is not just the music that made us dance. It is the humanity that made us feel. And as long as we keep telling his story, the king of pop will never be forgotten. Michael Jackson's fascination with cinema was no secret. For as long as he could remember, film had been his escape, his education, his second love after music. As a child, he would lose himself in the silent comedies of Charlie Chaplin, captivated by the way Chaplin could move audiences to both laughter and tears without uttering a single word. Chaplin was more than a performer to Michael, he was a mirror. A man who wore a mask of humor while hiding his private pain, a man adored by millions yet often alone in the quiet shadows of his own genius. Michael often spoke of wanting to create films that could move people the way music did, stories that could live forever, timeless and universal. He didn't just want to make music videos, he wanted to make cinema. Thriller had been a taste of that ambition, a groundbreaking short film disguised as a music video. Ghosts, though lesser known, was perhaps his boldest attempt, blending horror, dance, and social commentary into an epic narrative. But for Michael, these were only stepping stones. He dreamed of something bigger, something that could cement him not only as the king of pop but also as a master storyteller of the silver screen. And so, when we look at his quiet presence at the Palm Beach International Film Festival in April 2003, the pieces begin to fit. This was not a random appearance. This was Michael Jackson walking into a room where stories were born, where films were funded, where the future of cinema was decided over champagne and whispered deals. Perhaps he was not there to dazzle or to entertain. Perhaps he was there to listen, to learn, to connect. Perhaps, behind those soft eyes and that calm smile, he was imagining the films he never got to make. The tragedy, of course, is that those dreams would remain unfulfilled. The storm that followed 2003 left Michael with little room for artistic exploration. The accusations, the trial, the endless headlines, they consumed him, drained him, and forced him to retreat further into solitude. By the time the world saw him again in 2009, preparing for his This Is It concerts, the focus was back on music, on performance, on giving his fans one final gift. The cinema that Michael had longed to create remained trapped in his imagination, a promise unkept, a dream deferred. And yet, that night in Palm Beach stands as a whisper of what could have been. Imagine, for a moment, the alternate future. A Michael Jackson who was not torn apart by scandal, who was not suffocated by the media, who was given the space to create freely. A Michael who directed films, who told stories with the same precision and passion that he poured into his music. What worlds might he have built? What characters might he have brought to life? What truths might he have revealed to us through the lens of cinema? These are the questions that haunt the photographs of Palm Beach. Because as Michael sits at that table, silent and still, one cannot help but wonder what was racing through his mind. Perhaps he saw himself not as the superstar surrounded by cameras, but as the storyteller in waiting, watching, learning, preparing. Perhaps he saw in that festival a door to the next chapter of his artistry. Or perhaps, more simply, he was there as a man who wanted to feel normal for one night, to sit with friends, to share laughter, to be part of something that had nothing to do with the chaos of his life. That is the beauty and the heartbreak of Michael Jackson. He was always both, the dreamer and the survivor, the visionary and the vulnerable. As we reflect on Palm Beach now, 2 decades later, the images feel almost cinematic themselves. The soft glow of chandeliers, the polished black suits, the glint of Michael's red shirt against the darkness of the room. The cameras flashing, freezing him in moments that would outlive him. They look less like photographs of an event and more like stills from a film that was never completed. A film where the protagonist is both hero and mystery, both present and untouchable, and maybe that is fitting. Because Michael Jackson's entire life was a kind of cinema. His performances were larger than life, his music videos were mini-movies, his concerts were theatrical experiences. He blurred the line between reality and art until the two were indistinguishable. Palm Beach, then, becomes one more scene in that lifelong film. A scene without dialogue, without spectacle, but heavy with symbolism. A scene that invites us, the audience, to lean closer, to search for meaning in the silence. What makes this moment so powerful is its humanity. Too often, Michael was seen only as the king of pop, the untouchable icon, the myth. But here, at Palm Beach, we see him simply as a man among men. He is not moonwalking across a stage, not commanding thousands with his voice. He is sitting at a table, listening to friends, smiling softly. It is ordinary. And yet, because it is Michael Jackson, it becomes extraordinary. The world's greatest entertainer, captured in stillness, reminding us that even legends are human, and in that humanity lies the true legacy. Because Michael Jackson was never just about music, never just about fame. He was about connection. He was about reaching into people's hearts, whether through a song, a performance, or simply a look. Palm Beach shows us that even in silence, even in a moment where he said almost nothing, he still spoke volumes. His presence alone was enough to shift the energy of an entire room, to leave people breathless, to create a story we are still telling today. As the festival faded into memory, as the years rolled on and Michael's life took its tragic turns, Palm Beach became one of those rare glimpses into the quieter chapters of his story. A reminder that behind the scandals, the headlines, the trials, there was still the man who dreamed, who laughed with friends, who sat at dinners, who loved cinema, who wanted more than anything to leave behind a legacy of art that would last forever, and in a way, he did. Because Michael Jackson's life itself became that legacy. His music, his dance, his humanitarian work, his relentless pursuit of perfection, all of it forms the film that we continue to watch, analyze, and cherish. Palm Beach is just one scene in that film, a scene that reminds us of the layers we too often overlook. So when we think of Michael Jackson at the Palm Beach International Film Festival on April 5, 2003, we should not see just a celebrity cameo. We should see a man balancing on the edge of history, carrying both dreams and burdens, sitting quietly at a table while the world looked on. We should see the mystery that made him eternal, the humanity that made him real, and the legacy that continues to outshine the darkness of his struggles. Michael Jackson was more than the king of pop. He was the child who dreamed of the silver screen, the man who sought refuge in friendship, the artist who could change the energy of a room simply by walking into it. Palm Beach was proof of that. It was proof that his presence alone was art, that his silence was louder than applause, that his stillness could be as powerful as his dance. And so, as we close this chapter, let us remember Michael not just as the performer who thrilled us, but as the dreamer who longed for more. Let us remember that behind every headline was a man who loved, who laughed, who hoped. Let us remember Palm Beach as a night when Michael Jackson reminded the world that he was not only a legend, but also human. If you believe Michael Jackson's story deserves to live forever, don't let it end here. Share this video. Leave your thoughts. Tell the world about the man you see, not just the myth you were told. Because Michael Jackson's truth is bigger than the rumors, brighter than the shadows, stronger than the lies. Michael Jackson is not gone. He lives in the music, in the memories, in the stories like Palm Beach that we continue to tell. And as long as we keep telling them, the king of pop will never fade. If you believe his legacy should shine forever, don't just watch, act. Share this story, and let the world remember the real Michael Jackson.